What if I told you that some of the most reliable food crops on Earth don't grow in warm valleys or perfect gardens, but in places where winter freezes the ground solid for 6 months straight? Picture this: January, northern Norway. The sun barely rises. Snow presses against wooden farmhouses built generations ago. Supply ships delayed, roads buried, markets quiet. And yet families still ate. Not because they had supermarkets, because they had crops that ignored winter. Most modern gardens are built around comfort: tender tomatoes, annual vegetables, plants that collapse the moment temperatures fall below freezing. But across Scandinavia, from Icelandic homesteads to Finnish forest farms, food systems were built differently. They were built for interruption. This is the central conflict most people never notice: convenience versus continuity. Modern gardening asks, what grows fastest this summer? Ancestral gardening asks something else entirely: what still feeds you when summer fails? Today, I'm going to walk you through 14 Nordic hardy crops that survived cold centuries, poor soil, failed trade routes, and long winters. Crops documented in monastery records, frontier journals, and northern cottage traditions. Some store for 8 months without electricity. Some produce food for 20 years after a single planting. One, number 3, was treated almost like a wartime reserve during Scandinavian shortages. And number 1, it quietly turned small household plots into long-term food security systems for decades at a time. If your goal is resilience, time savings, or simply lowering what winter costs your family each year, this changes how you look at land. Let's start somewhere familiar, but misunderstood. The first crop is what Nordic farmers sometimes called the winter banker: kale. Most people think kale is a modern health trend: smoothies, juice bars, decorative raised beds. But long before that, hardy kale varieties were survival infrastructure across Scotland, Denmark, and coastal Norway. In fact, historical records show families harvesting leaves directly through frost and snow when little else remained alive. Here's the belief flip: most vegetables die after frost. Kale improves. Cold temperatures convert stored starches into sugars. The leaves soften. Flavor deepens. Research suggests frost exposure can even increase certain antioxidant compounds plants produce as protection against cold stress. Pause. Imagine walking outside in February, brushing snow aside, and harvesting dinner. No greenhouse, no replanting, just continuity. Plant kale in late summer. Give it spacing, about 18 inches per plant. Once established, many varieties tolerate temperatures down near 5 degrees Fahrenheit, sometimes lower, under snow cover. A small 20-square-foot bed can produce 30 to 50 pounds of harvestable leaves across a cold season. At typical grocery prices across the US or UK, that quietly replaces 120 pounds to 250 pounds worth of greens. And it keeps producing when supply chains don't. But northern farmers rarely relied on leaves alone, because the next crop solved a bigger problem: calories. Number 13, the underground vault Rutabaga. During long Nordic winters, above-ground food was unreliable. Roots were insurance. Rutabaga, a cross between cabbage and turnip, became a cornerstone crop across Sweden and Finland by the 1700s. It thrives where many vegetables struggle: cold soil, wind exposure, short seasons. Plant once in late spring, ignore it through summer, and harvest after frost. That's when sugars concentrate. A single 10 times 10-foot patch can yield over 80 pounds of dense roots. Think about that. 80 pounds from soil many gardeners would call poor. Stored properly in a cellar or cool garage, Rutabaga lasts 4 to 6 months. That's winter grocery reduction built directly into the ground. During difficult harvest years recorded in Northern Europe, families often stretched meals using stored roots like these. Not exciting food, reliable food. And reliability becomes more important in the next story, because history has a way of testing systems. Pause for a moment. In 1867, Finland experienced one of the worst famines in its recorded history after repeated cold summers destroyed grain harvests. Transportation networks were limited. Imports slow. Communities that survived best weren't necessarily wealthier. They were diversified: roots, greens, Storage crops, infrastructure disguised as gardens. Think about that the next time a single crop dominates a backyard. Which brings us to something surprisingly overlooked today. Number 12. The snow sweetener, parsnip. Parsnips were beloved across northern monasteries and rural cottages for one unusual reason. They preferred staying in frozen ground. Unlike potatoes, which must be lifted and stored carefully, parsnips can remain outdoors through winter beneath mulch or snow. Cold converts their starch into sugar. Harvest in March, and they taste sweeter than autumn carrots. Plant once. Minimal care. Deep roots break compacted soil naturally, saving work next season. A modest bed can produce 40 pounds or more per year. Stored or left underground, they replace months of purchased root vegetables. Research suggests parsnips also provide significant fiber and micronutrients traditionally valued during low fresh food winters. But sweetness alone didn't sustain northern households. Fat mattered, which leads to a crop many modern gardeners underestimate completely. Number 11. The Viking protein bean, broad beans. Broad beans appear fragile. They aren't. Historical Scandinavian planting calendars show them sown astonishingly early, sometimes when frost still lingered in soil. They tolerate cold down to roughly 25 degrees Fahrenheit once established. And here's why families depended on them. Protein storage. Dry the beans after harvest, and they store a year or longer. One 100 square foot patch can yield 15 to 20 pounds of dried beans. That translates into dozens of meals replacing store-bought legumes. During long winters, dried beans became stew foundations across northern Europe. Cheap, dense, dependable. Picture sacks hanging in timber kitchens through winter months. Food security. Visible on the wall. But vegetables alone didn't protect households when supply disruptions lasted longer. Something fermented did. Number 10. The winter fermenter, cabbage. Across Nordic countries, cabbage wasn't just eaten fresh. It became sauerkraut. Fermentation allowed families to preserve harvests without fuel or freezing. A single large cabbage bed can yield over 100 pounds in a season. Converted into fermented storage, that becomes food lasting 6 to 8 months. Clinical studies indicate fermented vegetables support gut microbial diversity, something traditional cultures understood long before laboratories existed. Pause 6 months from one harvest. That's continuity defeating seasonality. And yet cabbage was rarely grown alone, because farmers paired it with something that returned every year without reseeding. Number 9. The perennial onion, chives. Nordic cottage gardens almost always included chives near doorways. Not decoration, access. Snow melts first near homes and chives emerge early, sometimes while frost still grips soil nearby. Plant once. Harvest for decades. Some documented clumps in Scandinavian farmsteads survived 20 to 30 years. That's near zero maintenance food production. Early vitamins after winter mattered psychologically as much as nutritionally. Fresh flavor returning after months of stored food. Small thing, huge morale impact. And morale becomes critical during disruption. Which brings us to our second reality check. During World War II, shipping lanes across northern Europe became dangerous and unpredictable. Food imports dropped sharply in several regions. Governments encouraged household gardens again, not as hobbies, but as resilient systems. Cold-tolerant crops dominated recommendations because they required less fuel, fewer inputs, and survived unpredictable weather. History repeats quietly, sometimes through grocery prices instead of war, and the next plant was treated almost like an insurance policy. Number 8. The wartime asset, potatoes. Yes, everyone knows potatoes. But Nordic varieties changed the equation. Short-season, cold soil-tolerant strains allowed harvests even in difficult climates. Here's the number most people miss. A well-managed 100-square-foot potato patch can yield 150 to 200 pounds. That's potentially 300 pounds to 600 pounds worth of calories, depending on region and prices. Stored correctly, 5 to 7 months. One planting, half a year of meals. Think about that conversion. Grass lawns consume time and fertilizer. Potatoes produce winter, but potatoes alone were risky historically. Disease taught farmers diversification, which leads to something almost forgotten today. Number 7. The forest berry shield, Lingonberries. If you've visited Scandinavia, you've seen them everywhere. Lingonberries thrive in acidic forest soil where little agriculture succeeds. Cold hardy below -30 degrees Fahrenheit. Once established, bushes produce for decades. Families gathered pounds every autumn, often 10 to 15 pounds from small patches. Naturally acidic berries store exceptionally well as preserves. Low maintenance, minimal watering. Research suggests berries rich in plant compounds traditionally supported winter nutrition when fresh fruit disappeared. Picture children collecting berries under pine forests before first snow. Food and culture at once. But berries solved flavor. The next crop solved something deeper: oil. Number 6. The northern gold seed, flax. Across Viking and later Nordic farming communities, flax served two purposes: fiber and food. Flaxseed stores exceptionally well, often over a year when dry, rich in oils and calories valuable during winter diets. A modest garden plot can produce several pounds annually. Small yield visually, large nutritional impact. Clinical research continues examining flaxseed compounds connected to heart health support, but historically, its real power was independence. Oil without imports, fiber without factories. Pause. One plant replacing multiple supply chains. And still, winters demanded something comforting. Warm meals mattered. Which brings us to a humble survivor. Number 5. The frost survivor, leeks. Unlike onions, many leek varieties tolerate freezing conditions directly in soil. Nordic gardeners harvested them deep into winter months. Snow insulation protects roots. Plant once in spring. Harvest gradually for 6 months or more. A row only 15 feet long can yield dozens of meals. Low maintenance, slow harvest, perfect continuity crop. Imagine soup ingredients still growing outside while temperatures drop below freezing. That psychological security shows up again and again in historical journals. But halfway through winter, families relied heavily on something even more dependable. Pause. During harsh northern winters, fresh harvest windows shrink dramatically. The difference between comfort and stress often came down to storage planning months earlier. Not luck, system design, which leads directly to our next crop. Number 4. The cellar champion, carrots. Nordic storage carrots weren't small supermarket varieties. They were bred thick and dense. Packed into sand-filled boxes and root cellars, they lasted 5 to 8 months. Minimal spoilage. A 50-square-foot bed can easily yield 70 pounds or more. That's steady replacement of purchased vegetables all winter long. Research suggests carrots retain many nutrients surprisingly well during cold storage. Think about that. Plant once. Eat until spring. But one crop stood above most others when cold truly dominated landscapes. And this is where things escalate. Number 3. The Arctic grain, barley. Across Iceland and northern Scandinavia, barley survived where wheat failed. Short growing season, cold tolerance, reliable calories. Historical records show barley functioning almost like strategic food infrastructure. Stored dry, grain lasts years. Years. A small homestead patch producing even 40 to 60 pounds annually created bread security through winter. During difficult periods, communities leaned heavily on stored grains exactly like this. Modern gardeners rarely consider grains, but ancestors absolutely did, because calories stabilize households. Still, calories alone don't build resilience. Longevity does. Number 2. The evergreen herb, Angelica. In Nordic folklore and monastery gardens, Angelica held near legendary status. It thrives in cold climates and returns reliably year after year. Young stems eaten fresh. Roots preserved, seeds used traditionally in tonics and cooking. Research suggests aromatic plant compounds may support digestion, one reason monasteries cultivated it extensively. But its real advantage? Perennial reliability. Plant once. Harvest for years. Minimal effort. Maximum continuity. And yet even Angelica wasn't the ultimate northern system crop, because number 1 combined storage, calories, resilience, and compounding return. Before we reach it, one final reality check. In recent years, supply disruptions, shipping delays, and sudden price spikes reminded many households how dependent modern food systems can be. Most gardens still prioritize summer abundance. Very few plan for February. That's the gap ancestral systems quietly solved. And number 1 may be the clearest example. Number 1. The Nordic legacy crop, Jerusalem artichoke, also called sunchoke, and once planted, almost impossible to remove, which historically was exactly the point. Jerusalem artichokes tolerate brutal cold, poor soil, drought, and neglect. Tubers remain safely underground through winter, harvest whenever needed. No cellar required. A small patch, even 50 square feet, can produce 100 pounds or more annually once established. Year after year, some patches documented across Europe produce continuously for decades. Think about that math. 1 planting. 20 years of harvest, potentially thousands of pounds of food from the same ground. That's not gardening, that's infrastructure. Pause, snow outside. Food still waiting underground. Continuity wins. Step back for a moment, because something connects every crop you've just seen. Nordic families weren't choosing plants randomly. They were building a system, a cold climate resilience ladder. Fast morale foods, stored calories, perennials, long-term anchors. Here's how you can apply the same pattern today. First, fast wins, cold greens like kale or chives that give early harvest confidence. Second, calorie anchors, potatoes, barley, beans, foods that actually replace grocery dependence. Third, storage security, carrots, cabbage, Rutabaga, months of stability already prepared before winter begins. And fourth, legacy plants, Lingonberries, Angelica, Jerusalem artichokes. Plant once, benefit for decades. Modern lawns consume water, fertilizer, and weekends. Ancestral gardens quietly compounded value every year instead. Convenience asks for constant restarting. Continuity builds momentum. And maybe that's the real lesson hidden in northern agriculture. Resilience rarely looks dramatic. It looks ordinary. Until the moment it matters. If this changed how you think about cold climate gardening, the next place to go is deeper into perennial systems, especially the plants that regrow for decades with almost no effort. Because some gardens don't just survive winter. They outlive it. I'm curious. When you look at your yard, or the space you plan to plant, are you growing convenience? Or are you growing continuity? I'll see you there.